Greetings my friends and welcome back to the Home Slice. Today we've got some Nitro-V at 63 Rockwell and some custom CPM 3V from Charles Jones. You're catching me in the middle of a series where I'm testing dual grit edges, that is, edges tested coarse on one side and fine on the other, to see how they affect the performance of steel. And both of these ended up being pretty solid performers. Our initial reading was much better on the Nitro-V. It hits a much keener edge, but the vanadium in that 3V means that the lasting power is pretty good. I've always found 3V to be a pretty well balanced steel. It can be fairly hard to deburr. Some of you sharpeners might be wondering why I'm leaving the best numbers so high. And the short answer is that I've just been finding that with dual grit edges, the best number being low isn't necessarily correlated with the edge aggression lasting really long. Some of my best performing dual grit edges are somewhere around the 200 mark. So there can be a bit of coarseness or a bit of flexibility to the apex that in the end doesn't affect the long-term edge retention. I am not really sharpening at the moment and testing this stuff at the moment to see how long you can keep the razor edge or the hair whittling edge. It can be quite hard to get those things to last, but what I do find is that a dual grit edge will actually often hold a fairly satisfying level of edge aggression late in the game. You may be able to hear some beautiful New Zealand rain ambiance in the background, and that is because I am currently doing a voiceover huddled in my van because I live in a small house and all my children are asleep. Overall, these steels are great performers. I love each of these on a fine edge or a dual grit edge. I do find in a rope cut test when you're trying to muscle it through a giant manila rope that steels that have lower carbon content hit a plateau where they sort of feel like they're starting to round out a little bit, even though the best number is not super high. And so some of the high carbon crazy powder steels hold their late aggression a little bit better, but I think these two steels are sort of purpose built for like toughness and fine work and fine edges, and they're just beautiful for that, and they can do a pretty mean dual grit edge as well. This particular Nitro-V is on a knife model called the Coastal Camper, and it's one of the main models produced by my friend Wade, who is the founder of a custom bladesmithing company called Jensen Knives in Northern Territory, Australia. I've been super pleased with the edge stability on this steel, and the design is beautiful. That brings us to our results, and in this test the Nitro-V has cut through the 40mm manila rope 8 times, and CPM 3V squeezed out a couple more for a total of 10 cuts through the 40mm manila rope. I'm trying to keep these line charts from looking too much like spaghetti, so I've removed some of the results to try to post some relevant things to make some observations. The first thing is our SE 1095, which did 1 cut. That is sort of our baseline of like the lowest dual grit edge retention that I have experienced so far. Interestingly, the razor edge knives custom in 1095 that was hardened up above 63 Rockwell, the same Rockwell hardness as this Nitro-V, followed an incredibly similar line. The Nitro-V and the 1095, they kind of hung to this very similar reading at almost every point and finished the same. So it's interesting where you've got a low carbide steel and the makers really paid attention to microstructure. You sort of have a similar, really stable, steady edge holding pattern. There's a little initial dip in the Nitro-V pattern, but other than that, you can see those two edge wear patterns just kind of hug each other quite closely, and they both terminate at 8 cuts at a very similar reading. Other observations, you can see S35VN on a fine edge is the yellow, and although it reached 9 cuts, the working edge for most of the edge life on this razor edge knife and the Nitro-V were better. 3V is a little bit more of a wobbly line, so just a little bit more data noise in there, but it stretches out to 10 cuts, and I think that the dual grit sharpening really helped 3V to extend its edge life. Also, all those readings on 3V except one past about the 4 cut mark show improved keenness late in the edge retention on 3V over S35VN, which is interesting. This is a comparison against some similar and lesser edge retention steels, and this is our 2 present contenders against some heavier hitters. So we can see that 3V on a dual grit edge matched the cut count of Van-X on a fine edge, but Van-X with a dual grit edge managed to double that and hold out under 400 grams at 20 cuts, although the keenness is pretty low on some of those late readings, indicating sort of that it's just holding on to a really average sort of working edge, not a lot of high keenness. Our highest reading so far, I think, is 42 cuts with CPM 10V, but I didn't put it on here because it makes all the other lines a bit squished. Anyway, I'd say a solid performance from Nitro-V and from 3V. I think either one of these steels would benefit with a little bit of extended edge life from putting a dual grit edge on it. I think also Nitro-V is a great option for a fine edge. I think it just depends on what you're going for. A fine edge will have kind of better stability, a better chip resistance. A dual grit edge will have longer lasting edge aggression and working edge function. So you kind of just pick your edge on these steels based on what you want, because either one could do a great job of coarse, fine, or dual grit. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a link to my last test is on screen now. And for all the rest of you, I'll just say, hey, peace out from the home slice. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.